Welcome back to Valor Strategy, the place to be to get your daily dose of MMA and UFC news. In this video, we'll be detracting from the news and instead focusing on the actual history of UFC and MMA as we know them. From its rise as an unknown extreme sport to becoming one of the highest paid and most viewed shows in the world, it's a spectacle of great technique, skill, and dedication of one's commitment to growing into their best physical shape. So let's get started. Did you know that mixed martial arts as we know it today is actually a relatively new discipline? But it has a long history, with roots dating back to ancient times. MMA includes a variety of styles that combine techniques from different martial arts styles like Krav Maga, kickboxing, Kali, and LOTAR. Humble beginnings from the Greek pantheons. The Greeks, in 648 BCE, were pretty successful with their annual Olympic Games. But that year, they did something different. They expanded the standard Olympic Games to include pankration, which is Greek for all powers. This was the first known match in mixed martial arts. And the fun part, this style of MMA fighting had no set regulations. The only time a match came to an end was when one fighter was knocked out or raised his hand in submission. These conflicts lasted for several hours and the battles took place in a square, compact ring, which necessitated close combat. Techniques used included kicks, knee strikes, elbow strikes, joint locks, and chokeholds. The popularity of this sport declined along with the decline of the Greek civilization until it was revived in Brazil in the 1920s with the development of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and the resurgence of mixed martial arts. Many people think that the Greek mixed martial arts traveled to Asia and influenced Asian martial arts. But first, let's go back and start with Brazil, the contributions of Vale Tudo to the sport. In Brazil, minor sideshow fights became more popular at circuses and other events. The first recorded instance of this fighting style, known as Vale Tudo, took place in 1928. In the 1930s, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu fighters emerged, followed by boxers, capoeira practitioners, and luta livre fighters. The Gracie family, who were influential in the development of mixed martial arts, had a particular interest in Vale Tudo fights. They were introduced to the Japanese martial art of judo by Mitsuyo Mida and wanted to test their newly acquired skills in these fights. Vale Tudo fights were not necessarily regarded as sports in themselves and often had few rules. In some cases, there were essentially no restrictions, while in others, the fights were more like mixed grappling competitions. Events that had time limits can end in a draw if the time limit was reached, since the only way to win was to finish the other fighter. Today, mixed martial arts has evolved into a highly regulated sport, but it has its roots in these early Vale Tudo fights in Brazil. The first MMA legend, Helio Gracie. Helio Gracie is an important figure in the history of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. He and his brother Carlos are credited with creating the Brazilian form of the martial art. Helio is highly respected in the Jiu Jitsu community and is known for his fighting record, and is touted as the first MMA legend in the world. Despite being weak and initially having to study Jiu Jitsu by watching Carlos practice, Helio eventually recovered his health and began training on his own. He became known for facing significantly bigger opponents in Vale Tudo and grappling fights, and he became a legend after his 1951 bout with judoka Masahiko Kimura. Despite having a weight advantage, Helio lost the fight when Kimura broke his arm with a shoulder lock. Despite the loss, Kimura was very impressed with Helio and his jiu-jitsu skills and invited him and Carlos to learn in his dojo. The Gracies declined, but they named the shoulder lock technique the Kimura in recognition of Kimura's victory. Helio also had a long and famous match with one of his own disciples, Caldemar Santana, in 1955 that lasted for over 3 hours. Helio's contributions to martial arts have made him a legendary figure in the history of MMA. From Japan to the streets of Latin, in the late 1970s and 1980, members of the Gracie family began moving to the United States, including Rorion. He had trouble finding a martial arts academy in the Los Angeles area that would allow him to teach a class, and he was often turned down or even challenged to a fight by academy owners. Despite these challenges, Rorion gained a small group of followers and began teaching his extended family martial art out of a garage. His classes grew, and he began to attract students from other martial arts. These students' instructors often challenged the Gracies to fight to try to prove that their own martial art was superior. The Gracies recorded these encounters and used them to show the effectiveness of their family's art. This sparked interest in style versus style matches in the United States, which became the driving force behind the development of American mixed martial arts. In 1993, the Japanese promotion Pancrase was founded by professional wrestlers Masakatsu Funaki and Minoru Suzuki. It was meant to showcase the growing sport of shoot fighting in Japan, but it attracted fighters from around the world. Pancrase matches were known for their fast action, colorful shin guard boots, and man thons. It produced some of the first MMA stars, including the charismatic champion Bass Rutten. Pancrase was the first successful promotion built around MMA and approached it as a sport. MMA modernized with the rise of UFC. The Gracie family wanted to expand their martial arts academy in the United States, so they decided to start a tournament that pitted different styles against each other. They called it the Ultimate Fighting Championship and held the first event on November 12, 1993. The UFC was meant to be an infomercial for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and it became the most dominant mixed martial arts promotion in the world. At first, the UFC had no rules, time limits, or safety gear, and fights could only be won by stoppage. Royce Gracie, who was chosen over his more talented and accomplished brother Rickson because of his smaller size, became the first UFC champion and introduced American fight fans to the ground game with his submissions. Mark Coleman, a former NCAA champion and U.S. Olympic team member, invented ground and pound, which he used to become the first UFC heavyweight champion and the Pride 2000 Open Heavyweight Grand Prix winner. His success helped establish wrestling as the dominant base in the sport. If headbutts were still allowed, it's possible that Mark Coleman would still be the UFC champion. Dana White's takeover and transition to a modern sport. By 1997, the term mixed martial arts had been coined and the sport was growing. However, it had been banned in many states in the early 1990s, and it was not until the UFC instituted tighter rules, including weight classes, the use of gloves, and general safety rules, that it began to become more formalized. In 2001, the UFC was purchased by Zuffa, headed by Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta, who continued the process of formalizing the rules. This purchase showed that mixed martial arts was becoming a business, and as money came into the sport, fighters began to see it as a career rather than just a place to test their skills. They began to train in multiple disciplines and combine their skill sets to play to their strengths. For example, wrestlers began to train in Jiu Jitsu to defend against submissions and pass guard, while strikers began to train in wrestling to defend against takedowns and keep fights standing. This year produced many famous stars and helped launch mixed martial arts into the mainstream sports world. UFCs Revival. While UFC kept on growing, the lack of competitiveness and the rigid competition structure started to cause issues in the back end. As a result, UFC declined and the once dedicated fans started looking into other kinds of entertainment. This also coincided with the rise of internet and pay-per-view. That is until the late and great Stephan Bonnar met Forrest Griffin in the finals of UFC 1. The fight between Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar is now considered by Dana White to be the single biggest and best fight in UFC history. Most importantly, it's a fight that kick-started UFC's revival and subsequent success. The fight was exciting and brought in a large number of new fans and media attention, and it was watched by a record number of people on Spike. Despite some criticism of the quality of the fight, it is generally agreed that it was a must-watch event. Standing alone at the top, in 2007, Zuffa, the owner of the UFC, bought and ended Pride FC, the only global mixed martial arts promotion at the time. Since then, American MMA has dominated the world and Japanese MMA has struggled. As a result, MMA has moved further towards being a sport and less focused on entertainment. This is generally seen as a positive development because it has helped establish the sport's place among other combat sports and has gained respect from even those who do not like it. The UFC has also pushed its product into mainstream media more than any other promotion, with major sport media outlets around the world now covering MMA events and featuring MMA beat writers and columnists. Despite this success, many fans have missed Pride FC and continue to treasure its DVDs. And that's a wrap for today's video. Aren't you amazed at the constant evolution of MMA and how UFC has carried on the mantle since the takeover? What do you think is the next step forward for MMA? Let us know in the comments below.